our decision-making trees look more like this. And trying to make an appropriate decision in the midst of chaos is never easy. We hope that we will make the appropriate decisions, and when we do, we get really excited. But we need to learn from the others, how others have done it. So what now? As we've seen the development of emergency medicine from its beginnings, and we learned from other disciplines, we grew up alongside other disciplines to a point that we were able to stand up on our own 2 feet and become recognized clinicians within facilities. But in our own minds, we are more than that. We are literally often, with our toys, the superheroes of the health system. We are expected to manage all cases at all times. And admittedly, I do consider myself a superhero, but I don't look as good in spandex as others. But that can be our own kryptonite. And our own kryptonite is what is going to destroy our specialty. And that is what makes me concerned on our continent. Because we need to look at the life after, and understanding that if we don't do something now, there might not be life after. Because many of our residents are starting to think, if I'm able to get through the specialty program and finish, then what? Is there life after my residency? And let's look at the realities that our residents are faced. Firstly, from a time perspective. Unlike most disciplines, emergency medicine has to function at a high level right round the clock against our circadian rhythms. But in addition to this, it has a tremendous impact on a normal family life, on social lives, when emergency physicians are spending 2/3 of their working careers outside of normal working hours. I've mentioned the patient loads already, but that places additional strain on any individual. And the uncertainty of when that flood will hit adds additional stress. Then there is inevitable conflict, and that conflict may be between divisions, so between disciplines within a facility. It may be between colleagues, and often, unfortunately, these days, it's often conflict between patients and the clinical teams. And we are seeing increased numbers of severe assaults occurring of clinical staff, nursing staff, medical staff, by patients and family members of patients. We have the turf wars, now that we are an established discipline, having to fight for what we believe in our disciplines. The access block. At this stage, I've just received the updated stats from my unit this morning. We are outnumbered by a 2-to-1 factor, so there are more than 2 patients per emergency department bed waiting for beds in the ward, let alone the amount of patients that we are trying to meet. And in all of this, our residents are needing to try and balance life and work. And this is generally what a resident looks like at the end of their residency. They start out young and eager, but they are often quite jaded by the time that they end it. And that is something that concerns me, is what exactly are we going to do to ensure that this does not happen again? And this is being reported all over the world with regards to the stresses that emergency physicians are feeling. And that makes me worry. It keeps me up at night. The burnout in emergency medicine in our country is extreme. And most of our clinical specialists are looking to exit the specialty after only 10 to 15 years practicing as a specialist, because they just can't balance it all. And it's also not knowing what's around the corner. In addition to your regular loads, there are things like wars. And there will be another war, and there will be another pandemic. and emergency medicine will need to cope. Because, as was mentioned yesterday, emergency medicine is the front line. Finally, within our continent, job security has become a greater and greater risk. With financial meltdowns occurring all over, there are often not specialist posts for our residents to go into once they have graduated. And because of this, we see that many of these specialists that we've spent a lot of resources training are leaving the countries and leaving the continent simply in order to put food on the table. It makes me worry. This photograph is quite a unique one. This was the night shift welcoming the day shift and trying to impart their words of wisdom of what they'd learned overnight. So I've painted quite a bleak picture about emergency medicine on the African continent, that we are literally hanging on by our fingernails to keep services together. But it's not all doom and gloom. We are able to put band-aids on, and we can survive because of the spirit of emergency medicines. And what we need to ensure is that that spirit isn't extinguished. And this is when I start saying, I've spoken about the bad, let's talk about the good. So in South Africa, emergency medicine has just turned 20. It is almost an adult. But within the African continent, it is still a toddler in some areas, a teenager in others. But what has assisted is the formation of the African Federation for Emergency Medicine. It has helped societies get emergency medicine registered as and recognized as a base specialty. It is formed up by numerous national societies, and Srinath noted the importance of national societies in getting emergency medicine registered with authorities. But you can see across the African continent, those are the number of sites that there are now emergency physicians in place. And it's growing on a daily basis. What we're also seeing across the African continent is the sharing of resources. And these are not only from a financial perspective, but also from an intellectual one, where we are able to ensure that people have got a good training base, and residents are moved all over the continent in order to ensure that occurs. And then once they have been trained, they are assisted in the setup of more formalized systems in their base countries. And so there is hope. But whilst we are driving the development of emergency medicine in the African continent, we need to ensure that we are able to survive. We need to stand up for ourselves. And certainly we are not doing the greatest job in my neck of the woods. And so my last slide is just to say we need to keep calm and carry on, but perhaps not that calm. Emergency medicine thrives on the excitement, on the difficulty. We shouldn't shy away from it, but we also need to ensure that it doesn't damage us in the long run. We are not alone. We're not alone in South Africa. We are not alone on the African continent. Emergency medicine is a global force. It is together that we are able to move forward, and it's together that we can survive any crisis across the world. And it's meetings like these that emphasize that. I apologize that the sound isn't coming through, but it is one of my favorite quotations from Winston Churchill, who said, "This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It is perhaps the end of the beginning." Thank you.
Next is Dr. Paul Cabela from the United States.
Next page.
Okay, perfect.
Next page. Laser.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. You know, I'm giving a report on the Americas, and I'm going to be more heavily influenced on what's happening in the United States. One of the things that's happened through the Americas, as I understand, the volume in Canada after the pandemic is actually up. The volume, the volume in Mexico is up, and overcrowding is a problem in every country. But as Dr. Dickerson has said and pointed out, you know, the African emergency medicine organizations are about 20 years old. In the US, we turned 50 a couple of years ago. And so we're reaching some unique problems that I think all emergency medicine organizations, whatever their age, need to address. And these are some of the issues that we face in the US, which will be very different than some of the issues that face elsewhere. So I'm going to concentrate not on the same issues of overcrowding, but really what's happening in the US, and this is concern to the emergency physicians there. The biggest issue that we have in the US right now is a workforce issue. For many, many years, we wanted to train more emergency physicians. We projected that there was going to be surplus, or there's going to not be enough emergency physicians in the United States. But unfortunately now, we probably have trained too many emergency physicians. And so we are looking at potentially in 8 years, in 2030, to actually have a surplus of emergency physicians. But the issue that's happening here is that no one, of course, saw the pandemic. But in the United